A Mother's Last Gift. The story of Eleanor Walker is an emotional journey of love, forgiveness, and resilience. Eleanor Walker, at 89 years old, discovers she is miraculously pregnant shortly after losing her husband. Her family, particularly her estranged son Michael, struggles to accept this unexpected blessing, leading to conflict, redemption, and a powerful message about the strength of family bonds. Through Eleanor's unwavering faith and courage, she leaves behind a lasting legacy embodied by her granddaughter Grace, whose birth becomes the cornerstone for healing. The story follows the family's transformation as Grace carries Eleanor's teachings to inspire others, proving that even in life's darkest moments, love and forgiveness can prevail. Eleanor Walker sat on the porch of her modest farmhouse in the quiet Kansas countryside, gazing out at the golden fields of wheat swaying in the gentle autumn breeze. At 89, her silver hair framed a face etched with the lines of a life well lived, but not without struggles. Beside her, a rocking chair sat empty, its gentle creak a somber reminder of William, her husband of 65 years who had passed away just 2 weeks ago. William had been her anchor, a World War II veteran whose stories of courage and camaraderie had filled their home with life. Now the silence was deafening. Eleanor found herself retreating to memories of their youth, their struggles to build this farm, and the children they had raised together, Michael and Clara. Michael, the eldest, was a man of ambition, now a successful businessman in the city. He rarely visited, citing the demands of his career and his family. His wife, Sarah, had never been fond of Eleanor and William, often voicing her disdain for what she called burdens of old age. Clara, on the other hand, was Eleanor's confidant and caretaker. As a schoolteacher, she lived a modest life but was always present, especially in their time of need. On this particular evening, Clara arrived with a pot of chicken soup and a warm smile. "How are you holding up, Mom?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with concern. "I'm fine, dear," Eleanor replied, though her trembling hands betrayed her. "I just miss him so much. This house feels so empty now." Clara placed a comforting hand on her mother's shoulder. "I know, Mom. I miss him too. But you're not alone. I'm here." As they sat together, Eleanor's thoughts turned to Michael. "I wish Michael would come visit. It's been months." Clara hesitated, then sighed. "You know how he is, Mom. He's busy, but I'm sure he cares in his own way." Eleanor nodded, though her heart ached. She couldn't help but feel the growing distance between her and her son. The following week, Michael finally called. It wasn't to offer comfort, but to discuss finances. "Mom," his voice crackled over the line, "I've been meaning to talk to you about the expenses for Dad's care. It's been significant." Eleanor's heart sank. "Michael, I never wanted to burden you. I've used our savings for as long as I could." "It's not just about the money," Michael interrupted. "Sarah thinks, well, we think it might be time to consider other options. A nursing home, maybe." Eleanor was stunned. "A nursing home?" "Michael, this is my home. This is where your father and I built our lives, where we raised you and Clara." "Mom, I'm just trying to be practical," Michael said, his tone impatient. "You're getting older, and Clara can't take care of everything by herself. Think about it." Eleanor's hands shook as she hung up the phone. The son she had nurtured, sacrificed for, and loved unconditionally now viewed her as an inconvenience. Despite the heartbreak, Eleanor found solace in her faith and daily routines. She spent her mornings tending to the small garden William had loved and her evenings reading old letters he had written during the war. One chilly morning, as Eleanor sat by the kitchen window sipping tea, she felt a strange flutter in her abdomen. It was faint but undeniable. She dismissed it as indigestion, a symptom of stress, or perhaps her aging body reacting to grief. But as the days passed, the fluttering sensation grew stronger, accompanied by a peculiar heaviness in her stomach. Clara noticed her mother's pale complexion and persistent fatigue. "Mom, you've been looking unwell lately. You need to see a doctor," Clara insisted. "I'm fine," Eleanor protested weakly, though she knew something wasn't right. Clara eventually persuaded Eleanor to visit the town clinic. Dr. Marcia Collins, a kind but no-nonsense physician, conducted a thorough examination. "I'm going to order some tests, Mrs. Walker," Dr. Collins said after noting Eleanor's symptoms. "It's probably nothing serious, but we need to rule out any underlying conditions." A week later, the results were in. Dr. Collins looked at the ultrasound image, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Mrs. Walker," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "this might sound impossible, but you're pregnant." Eleanor stared at her, uncomprehending. "Pregnant? That can't be. My husband passed away 2 weeks ago, and I'm nearly 90. Dr. Collins nodded, still grappling with the revelation. "It's extraordinary, but it's true. Based on the fetus's development, the pregnancy began several months ago. This is extremely rare, but it's happening." Clara clutched her mother's hand, her own face pale. "Mom, what do we do now?" Eleanor's mind raced. The news was both a miracle and a burden. She thought of William and the life they had shared. Could this be his final gift to her? As she left the clinic, Eleanor felt the weight of what lay ahead. She would need all the strength she could muster to face this new chapter, one filled with uncertainty, wonder, and the challenges of a family divided. Eleanor sat in silence in the passenger seat as Clara drove them home from the clinic. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Kansas fields, but the warmth in the air did little to ease the chill that had settled over her. "Mom," Clara finally broke the silence, her voice hesitant. "What are you feeling right now?" Eleanor clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her mind racing. "I don't know, Clara. It feels surreal. At my age? How could this happen? What will people think?" Clara reached over to squeeze her mother's hand. "It doesn't matter what they think. This is a miracle, Mom. Maybe it's a sign from Dad." The thought of William brought a bittersweet smile to Eleanor's lips. "He always said life had a way of surprising us, but I never imagined anything like this." The days that followed were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions for Eleanor. She hadn't yet decided how to share the news with Michael, fearing his reaction. Clara agreed to keep the matter private for now, knowing how fragile her mother's emotions were. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves. One evening, Sarah called Clara unexpectedly. "I haven't heard from Eleanor in a while," Sarah said, her tone sharp. "Michael's been worried about the money. How's she holding up?" "She's fine, Sarah," Clara replied cautiously. "Fine?" Sarah scoffed. "Look, Clara, we all know Mom's getting older. If there's something going on, we have a right to know. Michael is doing everything for this family, and it's unfair to keep him in the dark." Feeling the weight of Sarah's words, Clara hesitated before responding. "I'll talk to Michael soon," she said, avoiding further explanation. The next day, unable to suppress her anxiety, Clara decided to tell Michael the truth. She called him over to the farmhouse. Michael arrived with Sarah, his demeanor stiff and businesslike. He barely acknowledged Eleanor before turning to Clara. "What's going on?" he demanded. "Sarah said you sounded tense." Clara took a deep breath, her voice steady but firm. "Michael, Mom's pregnant." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then, Michael laughed short, incredulous and bitter. "That's not funny, Clara. She's telling the truth," Eleanor said softly, her voice trembling. Michael's face darkened. "That's impossible. Mom, you're almost 90. And Dad." He trailed off, the implication clear. Eleanor's heart ached at her son's disbelief. "Michael, I don't understand it either. But the doctor confirmed it. This child, it's your father's." Sarah stood abruptly, her expression a mix of disgust and anger. "This is ridiculous. How can you expect us to believe something so absurd? You've embarrassed this family enough." Michael turned to Clara. "And you knew? You've been hiding this from me?" "I knew you wouldn't handle it well," Clara replied. "But this isn't about you, Michael. It's about Mom." Michael's reaction grew more volatile in the days that followed. He refused to speak to Eleanor, and Sarah made it clear that their family wanted no part in what she called this scandal. "You need to think about what this means for our reputation," Michael said during a heated argument with Clara. "Do you know what people will say? What they'll think of us? I don't care what people think." Clara shot back. "Mom needs our support. Can't you see that this is a miracle, not a mistake?" "It's not a miracle," Michael retorted. "It's an embarrassment." Eleanor overheard their argument from the next room, tears streaming down her face. She felt torn between the joy of the life growing inside her and the pain of losing her son's trust. Meanwhile, the news began to spread through their small community. A nurse at the clinic had mentioned the unusual case to a friend, and soon, whispers filled the town. Eleanor noticed the change immediately. When she went to church on Sunday, the usual warmth she received from her fellow parishioners had been replaced by wary glances and murmured conversations. "Did you hear?" One woman whispered loudly enough for Eleanor to hear. "She's pregnant. At her age. Can you imagine?" Another woman replied, "It's unnatural. What kind of example is she setting for her family?" Eleanor kept her head high, but inside, she felt the sting of their judgment. One evening, as Eleanor sat by the fire knitting, Clara approached her with a tentative smile. "Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe we shouldn't hide anymore. Let people talk. Let them see this for what it is, a miracle." Eleanor looked up, her eyes tired but thoughtful. "Do you really think people will see it that way?" Clara nodded. "They might if we show them. Let's start by telling your story to the church. If they can see your faith and strength, maybe they'll understand." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "For William's sake. For the child's sake. I'll try." The next Sunday, Eleanor stood before the congregation, her voice trembling but steady as she shared her story. "I know this may seem strange to many of you," she began, "but I believe this child is a gift, a reminder that life is precious, no matter how unexpected." As she spoke, some faces softened while others remained skeptical. But by the time she finished, the room was filled with a heavy, contemplative silence. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt a small sense of peace. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. Eleanor's speech at church marked a turning point, but it didn't erase the storm brewing within her family. Michael's anger had reached its peak, and his refusal to reconcile only deepened the divide. Clara, on the other hand, grew closer to her mother, her determination to protect Eleanor and the unborn child growing stronger with each passing day. A week after Eleanor's heartfelt address, Michael arrived at Clara's house unannounced. His face was tight with frustration as he stepped inside, Sarah trailing behind with her arms crossed. "We need to talk," Michael said sharply, directing his gaze at Clara but avoiding his mother's eyes. Clara folded her arms. "If you're here to make demands again, Michael, save your breath. I'm here because this situation is spiraling out of control," Michael replied. "Do you know what people are saying? Our family is becoming the laughingstock of the town." Eleanor, seated in a corner of the room, spoke softly. "Michael, I never meant for any of this to happen. This child is a miracle, not a shame." Michael scoffed. "A miracle? Mom, you're almost 90. How can you expect anyone to believe that?" Sarah chimed in, her voice icy. "Michael's right. This is ridiculous, and it's ruining his reputation. Either you end this madness, or we're cutting ties." Eleanor's heart broke at their words, but Clara stepped forward, her voice firm. "Michael, If you can't see this for what it is, a chance for love and forgiveness, then maybe it's better if you do walk away. But don't think for a second that you're in the right." Michael stared at his sister, his expression a mix of anger and hurt. Without another word, he turned and walked out, Sarah following closely behind. As the weeks passed, Eleanor began to feel the toll of her age and pregnancy. Her energy waned, and the heaviness in her body became almost unbearable. Clara grew increasingly concerned, accompanying her mother to every doctor's appointment. Dr. Collins, who had been monitoring Eleanor's condition closely, sat them down during a routine visit. "Mrs. Walker," she began gently, "your pregnancy is progressing, but it's not without risks. At your age, your heart and body are under immense strain. You need to rest as much as possible and avoid stress." Eleanor nodded, though she could see the worry etched on Clara's face. "I'll do my best, doctor." But rest was easier said than done. Between the strain of Michael's rejection and the whispers of the town, Eleanor found herself lying awake at night, wondering if she had the strength to see this through. The town's reaction to Eleanor's pregnancy remained mixed. While some began to admire her courage after her speech, others continued to gossip and judge. One evening, as Clara was shopping for groceries, she overheard two women whispering near the produce aisle. "I heard she's still planning to keep the baby," one woman said, shaking her head. "Unbelievable," the other replied. "At her age? She should think about what's best for everyone else, not just herself." Clara felt her anger rise but took a deep breath. Confronting them wouldn't change their minds. Instead, she focused on the people who supported her mother, like Pastor Reed, who had been a steady source of encouragement. While Eleanor faced challenges from the outside world, Michael was wrestling with his own demons. Despite his harsh words, guilt had begun to gnaw at him. Memories of his childhood flooded back, his mother reading him bedtime stories, her tireless efforts to ensure he succeeded in school, and her unwavering love even when he made mistakes. One night, as Michael sat alone in his study, he found himself staring at an old family photograph. It was taken during a summer picnic years ago. Eleanor and William were laughing, their arms around Michael and Clara. The joy in their faces was undeniable. Michael's chest tightened. He had been so focused on preserving his image and status that he had forgotten the foundation of his life, his family. As Eleanor's due date approached, Clara decided to throw a small gathering at her home to celebrate her mother's courage and resilience. She invited a few close friends and allies, including Pastor Reed and Dr. Collins. The evening was filled with warmth and laughter, a rare reprieve from the tension that had surrounded Eleanor for months. "Thank you all for being here," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've been through so much, but knowing I have your support means the world to me." As the gathering came to a close, Clara noticed a familiar figure standing hesitantly at the edge of the yard. It was Michael. Clara approached him cautiously. "Michael, what are you doing here?" He looked at her, his expression a mixture of vulnerability and determination. I wanted to see Mom. To talk to her." Clara hesitated, then nodded. "She's in the living room. Go ahead." When Michael stepped inside, he saw Eleanor sitting by the fireplace, her hands gently resting on her swollen abdomen. For a moment, he was struck by how frail yet strong she looked. "Mom," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor looked up, her eyes filling with tears. "Michael." The two sat in silence for a moment before Michael spoke again. "I've been a fool. I let my pride and fear get in the way of what really matters. I'm so sorry, Mom." Eleanor reached out and took his hand, her grip weak but firm. "It's never too late, Michael. All I've ever wanted was for us to be a family." Though Michael's apology brought some relief, the road to healing was far from over. Sarah remained distant, and the wounds of the past months couldn't be mended overnight. But for Eleanor, The simple act of having her son back by her side was enough to rekindle hope. As she prepared for the final and most challenging chapter of her journey, she found strength in the love that had begun to rebuild itself within her fractured family. Eleanor's health continued to decline as the weight of the pregnancy pressed harder on her frail body. Despite her physical challenges, she remained resolute, drawing strength from Clara's unwavering support and Michael's tentative but heartfelt efforts to reconnect. The small reconciliation with Michael had reignited a spark of hope within Eleanor, but the journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty. It was a crisp autumn morning when Eleanor and Clara visited Dr. Collins for what they hoped would be a routine checkup. After a thorough examination, Dr. Collins sat them down, her expression grave. "Mrs. Walker," she began, her voice soft but firm, "I need to be honest with you. Your condition is growing more complicated. Your heart is under significant strain, and the risk of complications during delivery is extremely high." Eleanor nodded slowly, her resolve unshaken. "I've made it this far, doctor. I won't give up now." Clara's eyes brimmed with tears. "But Mom, what if something happens to you?" Eleanor reached out and took her daughter's hand. "Clara, this child is a part of me and of your father. If it's my time to go, then at least I'll have given life to something beautiful." Dr. Collins interjected gently. "We'll do everything we can to ensure both you and the baby are safe, but you need to prepare for all possibilities." News of Eleanor's condition spread quickly through the town, sparking heated debates among the townsfolk. "She's being reckless," one man muttered to a group outside the local diner. "At her age, she's risking her life and the baby's." "She's brave," a woman countered. "She's showing us that love and hope can exist even in the most unlikely situations." The conversation spilled into church gatherings, community events, and even casual conversations at the grocery store. Some admired Eleanor's courage, while others condemned her decision as selfish or foolish. Eleanor tried to tune out the noise, but the weight of public opinion sometimes felt as heavy as the pregnancy itself. One chilly evening, as Eleanor rested by the fire, there was a knock at the door. Clara opened it to find Sarah standing on the porch, her face unreadable. "Sarah," Clara said cautiously, "what are you doing here?" "I came to talk," Sarah replied, her voice tight. "To Eleanor." Clara hesitated, but stepped aside to let Sarah in. Eleanor looked up in surprise as Sarah entered the room. "Eleanor," Sarah began, her tone less hostile than usual, "I've been thinking about everything. About Michael, about the baby. And I need to apologize." Eleanor blinked, taken aback. "Apologize? For what, Sarah?" "For how I've treated you," Sarah admitted. "I was so focused on what this meant for me and Michael that I forgot about what it meant for you. I'm sorry." Eleanor's lips trembled as she smiled faintly. "Thank you, Sarah. That means more to me than you know." Sarah sat down, her posture softening. "I don't understand everything about this, but I want to help. I want us to be a family again." Just as the family began to mend, disaster struck. Late one night, Eleanor woke in excruciating pain. Clara, alarmed by her mother's cries, rushed to her side. "Mom, what's wrong?" Clara asked, panic rising in her voice. "It's the baby," Eleanor gasped. "Something's wrong." Clara quickly called for an ambulance. By the time they arrived at the hospital, Eleanor's condition had worsened. Dr. Collins was waiting, her face grim. "She's going into premature labor," Dr. Collins explained. "We need to act fast." Eleanor was rushed into the delivery room, leaving Clara and Michael, who had hurried to the hospital upon hearing the news, pacing anxiously in the waiting area. Inside the delivery room, Eleanor fought through waves of pain, her fragile body straining under the immense pressure. The medical team worked tirelessly, their movements precise but urgent. Dr. Collins turned to Eleanor, her voice steady but urgent. "You're doing great, Eleanor. Just one more push." With a final, desperate effort, Eleanor brought a tiny baby girl into the world. The room was filled with the sound of the baby's first cry, a piercing, miraculous sound that brought tears to the eyes of everyone present. But the joy was short-lived. Eleanor's body, already weakened, began to shut down. Machines beeped frantically as the medical team scrambled to stabilize her. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open briefly, and she turned to Dr. Collins. Is she okay?" Dr. Collins smiled softly, holding the baby close. "She's perfect, Eleanor. You did it." Eleanor's lips curved into a faint smile before her eyes closed. The room fell silent as the machines flatlined. In the waiting room, Clara and Michael froze as Dr. Collins stepped out, her expression somber. "The baby is healthy," she began. "But Eleanor, she didn't make it." Clara collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Michael stood motionless, his face pale. "I need to see her," he whispered. Dr. Collins nodded and led them to Eleanor's room. She lay still, her face peaceful, as though she had simply fallen asleep. In her arms was the baby, swaddled in a soft pink blanket. Michael approached hesitantly, tears streaming down his face. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have been there for you." Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "She knew you loved her, Michael. That's all she ever wanted." As they stood by Eleanor's bedside, Clara reached for a folded piece of paper on the nightstand. It was a note from Eleanor, written in her shaky handwriting. "Her name is Grace," the note read, "because she is a gift of love, forgiveness, and hope. Take care of her, my loves." Michael cradled the baby gently in his arms, tears falling onto her tiny face. In that moment, he made a silent vow to honor his mother's memory by being the man she had always believed he could be. The days following Eleanor's passing were a blur of grief and quiet resilience. Clara and Michael, though still grappling with their loss, found solace in the presence of Grace, the tiny baby who now symbolized hope and a chance for redemption. Eleanor's funeral was held on a crisp autumn morning, attended by family, close friends, and a surprising number of townsfolk. Many who had once judged Eleanor now came to pay their respects, moved by the strength and love she had demonstrated in her final months. Pastor Reed delivered a heartfelt eulogy. "Eleanor Walker lived a life of quiet courage," he said. "In her final chapter, she showed us the extraordinary power of love, perseverance, and faith. Her legacy lives on in her family and in little Grace, a gift she left for all of us." Michael stood silently at the edge of the gathering, holding Grace close. The weight of his guilt was almost unbearable, but he resolved to use this moment as a turning point. Later, as they lowered Eleanor's casket into the ground, Clara whispered, "Goodbye, Mom. We'll take care of her. I promise." Back at Clara's house, the family sat in a quiet circle, Grace asleep in a bassinet nearby. "I don't know how we're going to do this," Clara admitted. "Raising her, keeping her connected to Mom's memory. It feels overwhelming." "We'll do it together," Michael said firmly. "I failed Mom, but I won't fail Grace." Clara glanced at her brother, surprised by the determination in his voice. "What about Sarah? She hasn't exactly been supportive." Michael sighed. "I'll talk to her. She needs to understand that this is non-negotiable. Grace is family." True to his word, Michael had a difficult but necessary conversation with Sarah. Though it took time, Sarah eventually came to see Grace as more than a reminder of Eleanor's unconventional choices. She saw her as a new beginning for their family. As weeks turned into months, the town began to view Grace not as a source of scandal but as a miracle. Clara, now raising Grace full-time with Michael's help, often brought her to church and community events. At first, the whispers persisted. But as people saw the joy Grace brought to Clara and Michael, their perspectives softened. "She's a beautiful baby," an elderly woman at church remarked one Sunday. "Eleanor would be proud." "She is," Clara replied with a warm smile. and she's going to grow up knowing exactly who her grandmother was. Caring for Grace changed Michael in profound ways. The once distant and career-focused businessman found himself spending weekends at Clara's house, feeding Grace, changing diapers, and reading her bedtime stories. One evening, as Michael rocked Grace to sleep, Clara watched from the doorway. "You've changed, you know," she said quietly. Michael glanced up, a bittersweet smile on his face. "Grace changed me. Mom changed me. I just wish I could have told her how much she meant to me before it was too late." Clara sat beside him. She knew Michael. She always knew. As Grace's first birthday approached, Clara and Michael decided to host a small celebration. They invited family, friends, and even some of the townsfolk who had once judged Eleanor harshly. The gathering was held in the backyard of Clara's home, under the same oak tree where Eleanor had often sat and shared stories with her children. Michael stood to make a toast. "A year ago, we lost an incredible woman, our mother, Eleanor Walker. But we also gained something extraordinary, Grace. She's more than a child. She's a reminder of what Mom stood for: love, forgiveness, and resilience. Let's honor her memory by living those values every day." The crowd raised their glasses, and for a moment, the weight of grief was replaced by a sense of unity and hope. Later that evening, Clara found an envelope tucked away in one of Eleanor's old journals. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. It was a letter Eleanor had written before Grace was born. Clara gathered Michael and read it aloud. "My dearest Clara and Michael, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. I want you to know how deeply I love you both. You were my greatest joys and my proudest accomplishments. Grace is my final gift to this family. She represents all that I hoped for: love, unity, and forgiveness. Take care of her, and take care of each other. Remember, life is full of unexpected miracles. Embrace them, and never let fear or doubt overshadow the love that binds us together. Love always, Mom." Tears streamed down Clara's face as she finished reading. Michael, his voice choked with emotion, said, "She always knew exactly what to say." Over time, Grace grew into a lively and curious toddler, her laughter filling the house with the same warmth Eleanor had once brought. Clara continued to teach, and Michael found a better balance between work and family, ensuring he was always present for Grace. The family made it a tradition to visit Eleanor's grave every year on her birthday, bringing flowers and sharing stories about her life. "Do you think she knows?" Grace asked one day when she was old enough to understand. "She knows," Clara said with a smile. "She's watching over us always." As Grace blossomed into adulthood, she carried with her the lessons her grandmother had left behind. She became a writer, penning a memoir about Eleanor's life and the miraculous circumstances of her birth. The book, titled A Mother's Last Gift, became a bestseller, touching the hearts of readers across the country. In its final pages, Grace wrote, "My grandmother, Eleanor Walker, taught me that love is the most powerful force in the world. It can heal wounds, mend relationships, and bring light to the darkest places." Her story is a testament to the miracles that life can offer, even in its final chapters. Years passed, and Grace blossomed into a spirited and determined young woman. Growing up in the loving care of Clara and Michael, she inherited Eleanor's resilience and deep compassion. Her grandmother's story and the circumstances of her birth shaped her worldview, instilling in her a profound sense of purpose. By the time Grace turned 18, she began to delve into the story of her grandmother, determined to uncover every detail about the woman who had shaped her family's legacy. She spent hours reading Eleanor's journals, listening to Clara's recollections, and piecing together fragments of her grandmother's life. One day, Grace approached Clara with a determined look. "Aunt Clara, I want to write a book about Grandma. About her life, her strength, and everything she stood for." Clara smiled, her eyes misty. "Your grandmother would have loved that. She always believed in sharing her story to inspire others." Grace nodded. I don't just want to tell her story. I want to show the world the power of love and forgiveness just like she did. To fully understand Eleanor's journey, Grace decided to visit the places and people who had been part of her grandmother's life. Her first stop was the old farmhouse in Kansas, now abandoned, but still standing as a silent testament to Eleanor's resilience. As Grace walked through the creaking wooden floors, she imagined her grandmother's life here, the laughter, the struggles, and the love that filled these walls. She found remnants of Eleanor's life, an old rocking chair, a dusty photograph of Eleanor and William, and a faded recipe book filled with handwritten notes. This is where it all began, Grace whispered to herself, her heart swelling with pride. Her journey also took her to the church where Eleanor had delivered her powerful speech. Pastor Reed, now retired, greeted Grace warmly. "You have her eyes," he said with a smile. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. She taught us all what it means to love unconditionally." As Grace uncovered more about Eleanor, she also sought to understand her father's transformation. Michael had become a deeply devoted parent to Grace, but his guilt over his treatment of Eleanor still lingered. One evening, as they sat together in Clara's living room, Grace asked him, "Dad, do you ever regret the way things were with Grandma?" Michael sighed, his expression heavy with emotion. "Every single day. I let my pride blind me to what truly mattered. But Grace, you've given me a second chance to be the man she believed I could be." Grace reached for his hand. "She forgave you, Dad. And so do I." After years of research and writing, Grace completed her memoir, A Mother's Last Gift. The book wove together Eleanor's story with her own reflections on family, forgiveness, and the extraordinary circumstances of her birth. When the book was published, it quickly gained attention, resonating with readers across the country. Bookstores held readings, schools invited Grace to speak, and media outlets praised her for bringing Eleanor's story to life. "I wanted to honor my grandmother," Grace told an interviewer during a televised segment. "She taught me that love is the most powerful force in the world. It can heal, transform, and connect us in ways we never imagined." The book not only cemented Eleanor's legacy, but also sparked change within the town. Those who had once judged Eleanor now spoke of her with admiration and regret. The town's library created a special section in her honor, featuring books on resilience, love, and forgiveness. A plaque was placed outside the old church, commemorating Eleanor's speech and the impact it had on the community. Even Sarah, once a harsh critic of Eleanor, found herself moved by Grace's words. She approached Grace after a reading event, tears in her eyes. "I didn't see your grandmother for who she truly was back then. But your book, it's opened my eyes. Thank you for that." Grace embraced her stepmother, knowing that Eleanor's message of forgiveness was continuing to ripple outward. As Grace grew older, she carried Eleanor's lessons into every aspect of her life. She pursued a career in advocacy, focusing on supporting elderly communities and championing family reconciliation programs. One sunny afternoon, she returned to the farmhouse with Clara and Michael. The once abandoned home had been restored and turned into a community center, dedicated to fostering family bonds and celebrating Eleanor's legacy. Grace stood in the center of the main hall, looking at a framed photograph of Eleanor that hung on the wall. Below, it was a quote from her grandmother. "Life is full of miracles. Embrace them with love, and you'll find the strength to overcome anything." Years later, as Grace stood before a packed auditorium during a keynote speech, she reflected on how far her family had come. "My grandmother, Eleanor Walker, was an ordinary woman who did extraordinary things," she began. "She taught us that love is a choice we make every day, even when it's hard." Her story isn't just my family's story, it's a reminder to all of us to cherish our loved ones, forgive our mistakes, and live with purpose. The crowd erupted in applause, but Grace's thoughts drifted to the past. She could almost hear Eleanor's gentle voice, feel her warm embrace, and see her proud smile. Eleanor's legacy wasn't just a story, it was a living testament to the power of love, carried forward by the very family she had fought so hard to hold together. As Grace stood before the old farmhouse turned community center, she marveled at how much her family's story had come to symbolize resilience and reconciliation. What had once been a modest home on the Kansas prairie was now a place of learning and connection, its walls adorned with photographs and memories of Eleanor Walker's life. The building had been renamed Eleanor's House, a place for family, serving as both a tribute to her grandmother and a space for others to reconnect with their loved ones. The day of the center's grand reopening had finally arrived. Families from across the town and beyond gathered in the large, renovated barn where rows of chairs had been set up for the ceremony. A soft hum of excitement filled the air as attendees admired the exhibits detailing Eleanor's journey, including artifacts like her journals, William's wartime letters, and baby photos of Grace. Clara stood at the entrance, welcoming guests with her warm smile. At the center of the room was Michael, holding a photo of Eleanor. Though his hair was now streaked with gray, his expression was one of peace and contentment, something he hadn't felt in years. Grace, now in her mid-30s, was the guest of honor, dressed in a simple but elegant dress. As the room quieted, Grace stepped up to the podium. She glanced around, her heart swelling as she saw so many familiar faces. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady. "This house is more than just bricks and wood. It's a symbol of love, perseverance, and the unbreakable bonds of family. It's a place where we can remember the remarkable woman who taught us what it means to truly live." Grace paused, her eyes glistening. "My grandmother, Eleanor Walker, was an ordinary woman who faced extraordinary challenges. She wasn't perfect, but she was courageous, kind, and fiercely devoted to her family. This center exists because of her, and because of the lessons she left behind." As she spoke, Grace felt a wave of emotion. "Grandma taught me that life isn't about avoiding hardships, it's about facing them with grace. It's about forgiving each other, even when it's hard. And it's about believing in miracles, no matter how unlikely they may seem." The crowd erupted in applause as Grace stepped down from the podium. After the ceremony, Michael wandered through the exhibits, his thoughts drifting back to his mother. He stopped in front of a framed photograph of Eleanor holding baby Grace, her face glowing with joy despite her frailty. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I hope you can see this. I hope you know how much you've changed all of us." Clara approached him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "She'd be so proud of you, Michael. You've come a long way." Michael nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "It's all because of her and Grace." As the sun set over the fields, the family gathered in the garden behind the center. Grace's young daughter, Eleanor, named after her great-grandmother, ran through the flowers, her laughter filling the air. "She has her namesake's spirit," Clara said, watching the little girl with a smile. "She does," Grace replied. "I see it every day. She's curious, fearless, and full of love just like Grandma." Michael leaned back in his chair, watching the next generation carry on the legacy Eleanor had built. "You know," he said, his voice contemplative, "Mom always believed in second chances. I think this family proves she was right." The following year, Grace's memoir, A Mother's Last Gift, was adapted into a documentary. The film chronicled Eleanor's life, from her early years on the farm to the miraculous birth of Grace and the family's journey of reconciliation. The documentary won several awards, drawing attention to issues Eleanor had faced, such as ageism, family estrangement, and the importance of intergenerational support. As Grace traveled the country to promote the film, she met countless people who shared their own stories of redemption and forgiveness. "Your grandmother's story changed my life," one woman told her at a screening in New York City. "It made me pick up the phone and call my mother after years of silence." On the 20th anniversary of Eleanor's passing, the family held a private gathering at the farmhouse. The now adult Eleanor, Grace's daughter, stood before her great-grandmother's grave, reading aloud from her namesake's journal. "Life is a series of unexpected blessings," she recited. "Sometimes they come disguised as challenges. Embrace them, and you'll find the beauty hidden within." As the family shared stories and memories, the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and gold, casting a warm glow over the fields. Grace looked around at her family, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. "Grandma would have loved this," she said softly. "She's here," Clara replied. "In all of us." Years later, when Grace's daughter Eleanor took over the community center, she added a new plaque to the entrance. It read, "In honor of Eleanor Walker, whose love transcended generations and whose story continues to inspire us all." Her legacy is a reminder that no challenge is too great, no bond too fragile, and no heart beyond redemption. As visitors entered the center, they were greeted by a quote that had become synonymous with Eleanor's life. "Life is full of miracles. Embrace them with love, and you'll find the strength to overcome anything." The story of Eleanor Walker lived on, not just in the hearts of her family, but in the lives of everyone who learned from her unwavering faith in love and forgiveness.